All right, so let's jump into this. And the first thing we want to talk about is the role of the CFO. So, Steve Weinberger, why are CFOs so crucial? And what's it like when you step in to the role as a new CFO after one of these deals closes?
That's a great question. I'm going to give you a CFO kind of answer at it. It depends. Let me give you two scenarios of PE-owned firms. One is Rainier. So it was PE, private equity owned. The team had it for about 8 or 9 years, and they were ready for an exit. So they hired me. So they needed a CFO with specific experiences, i.e., they wanted somebody who's done a lot of M&A. They wanted somebody with significant relationships, sort of with investment bankers, with PE firms. They wanted somebody to be able to manage a balance sheet, reduce debt, deliver on targets. So they wanted sort of an M&A guy with lots of experience, and we had a very happy ending, a very successful outcome. On the other end of the spectrum, I can tell you a story. In 2016, private equity firm A bought a really great asset. Some would argue they overpaid for the asset. Therefore, they had to extract synergies quickly. So what they did do is try to integrate way too fast, and it was way too complicated. And they hired a CFO who had very little experience in integrations. He was an M&A guy, but he wasn't the kind of guy they needed at that specific time, at that specific place. Long story short, a year ago, that company was auctioned off out of bankruptcy. So again, it depends on where the firm is at in terms of what they're looking for.
Russ, Anshin could help a firm find a CFO. It helps with accounting. These are really important issues. What is it that the CFO, the responsibility in getting a new enterprise off and running after the deal closes?
They always have to worry about what we call post-conversion trauma. So after you kind of merge the two entities together, one of the things you always struggle with is making sure that the systems, processes, et cetera, all kind of working in tune with each other. And many times that becomes, I won't say a breaking point, but it becomes a source of frustration. And there's always what we call a lot of day two issues. You know, what we tend to do is when we go into an organization is try to help them before the actual transition takes place to make sure that all the migration efforts are, cleared up and ready to go on day one.
Sean, the differences in accounting, are there differences for, say, a publicly traded company versus the private enterprise that may exist prior and post one of these deals?
The level of diligence might, but, at the end of the day, I mean, you always want to know exactly what's going on. For private companies, what tends to happen is, before a transaction, they might not have had the experience of having the books looked at in a professional manner. And so there's a lot of work that has to be done. And so for many of my clients, when they come to me about a transaction, whether it's private equity or not, I say, look, we need to take a look and make sure you have the proper, proper CFO, proper accounting firm in place. And that takes a lot of time.
What are some of the best practices after a deal has closed that you think CFOs, at least successful CFOs, use?
Well, look, as I said, it's really easy to buy a company. You write a check and it's easy. The hard part is the integration. So you've got to communicate. You can never communicate enough. And as I said a little earlier, there's no easy way to do it. It takes time, it takes energy, it takes resources, it takes a lot of money, a very detailed plan. So again, the successful companies know that it takes time, they bring in the required resources, and they really have a very detailed Gantt chart and timetable for an integration.
John, when we hear it takes time, does the money side of the deal, how long in your transaction histories do you wait?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's a little bit of a balancing act with, building on what Steve Weinberger said. You have to have, some shorter term objectives for the integration. And then ultimately you're driving towards the long-term goals. But it's sort of one of those things where those short-term goals that you have to accomplish first really do need to be done first in sequence before you can actually get, to the end goal. So I think, I've seen major integrations where there are certain activities that could take as long as, 2 years. But obviously, it's just something that you have to keep chipping away at throughout that 2 years and making progress to actually achieve those goals over time.
Jim, I would imagine what Freeman Clark does on occasion is after these deals, some people take the money and run, the CFOs go on to other jobs. But your firm, you help find whether it be a temporary or permanent CFO. Isn't that one of the roles that Freeman Clark would play?
Yes, that's right. We really focus in on the chief technology officer, sometimes called the IT leader. And that's something that we do because you're exactly right, Adam. Someone may up and leave, and you really need someone with a little experience in mergers and acquisitions, the functional skills to navigate through the IT systems, and an individual with some notion about digital transformation. So that's what Freeman Clark does. On a fractional basis, we'll parachute in an experienced technology leader that can sit at the leadership table with the CFO and the CEO and help navigate, the two IT systems that will ultimately need to be integrated.
Sean, from the private equity side, do you ever have a team of managers or C-suite officers like a CFO ready to jump in, or do you at least try to work with the existing C-suite?
I definitely try and work with the existing C-suite. They've been there for a while. They know exactly the operations and the culture of the firm. It's usually on a case-by-case basis, so it won't be sort of all management needs to be replaced. It'll be, maybe it's a CFO, maybe it's a controller, maybe it's someone in charge of human resources, but it really is you try to exhaust it and make sure that you do everything you can, but if it's just not going to work going forward, you have to make the choice.
John, I'm curious from your experience, do you find that C-suite tends to leave after a transaction and that you need to bring in your people, or do you find the transition tends to go forward after the deal closes?
Yeah, I think it, and not to use the, a Steve Weinberger reference here that I think he kind of led off with, but I think it does depend. I think it's very situationally dependent. And I think, the CFO role generally is just a job that requires, the person in it to wear a lot of hats a lot of times. So, you have, the FP&A and kind of the forecasting side of things. You have more of the financial reporting and compliance side of things, I'll call it. And you have then the deal side of things, if it's a roll up where you're going to go and acquire a lot of other firms. And then you also have like the tax side of it. And I'm probably missing some stuff in there too, right? But it's a position that requires a lot of different skills. So I think, as the PE fund and from the board perspective, you just have to weigh what is most important for that particular company and for that particular CFO job.
Steve Weinberger, let's wrap this up. Do you have any last thoughts?
I do. Typically, you keep the commercial team together, right? Sales and marketing team that sort of adds value. And as I said earlier, you need to make sure you have the right CFO in place with the appropriate objectives. If the company wants to integrate, make sure the CFO is really good at that. If you want to engage in more M&A, make sure the CFO is really good at that. But by and large, I think the CFOs of acquired companies are sort of expendable depending on the objectives of the company.
Well, want to thank everybody for joining us today. Sean O'Dowd, Jim Sharp, John Butler, Russ Saperstein, Stephen Malore, and Steve Weinberger.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks a million, and good luck with the rest of your day. Thanks for being with us. That's a great job.